Let's welcome aboard my buddy Tim Doyle. Is covering the NCAA tournament, the Final Four for CBS Sports live out in Indianapolis. Was on the call the Nets game last night for NBA TV. He's all over the place. Tim, good morning, brother. How are you?
Moose, I'm doing fantastic. I have one big issue, though, okay? The set for CBS Sports is outside, and we're expecting 70s on Saturday and Sunday. But today, 35 degrees, and I have learned that Target, Marshalls, TJ Maxx, Dollar Store, Five Below, every store in Indianapolis, I could not find one pair of mittens in this whole city. I almost wore women's mittens with just the thumb, and then like all the hand was covered. I was like with the shell, and I was like, I can't do that.
Well, Tim, you're a Chicago guy. How do you not bring a pair of gloves just to be safe?
This is what makes the Midwest so tough. Is like there's a couple days in March where it's like 65 and you feel like you're turning the corner, and then all of a sudden, bam, it punches you right in the face, back to 35 degrees.
No. Well, listen, good luck and try and stay warm, all right? Put the hands in the pockets when you're on set if you can, which is impossible to do. Tim, let's get into the Final Four first and then get your thoughts on the NBA a little bit. Are we steamrolling to a championship game Monday night where it's going to be Baylor and Gonzaga? Let's talk about the two matchups this weekend first before we get to that potentially on Monday night. What about this UCLA team and Mick Cronin and the Bruins coming in first four to the Final Four? We've seen other teams do that before, but it's a remarkable run. They're an 11 seed. They're a 14-point dog. Last I checked against Gonzaga, undefeated for Mark Few. Can the Bruins stun everybody once again and make this not just a game, but maybe pull off the upset?
Can they win this game? Probably not. But I love them getting 14 in this spot. 14 points? I kind of went through a lot of film of theirs, and in the month of March, Moose, they lost their first three games of the month, UCLA did. And listen to how they lost. They lost at Oregon. They were up 11 with 11 minutes left, lost that game. They lost on a last-second shot to USC, who obviously just got beat by Gonzaga. And then they lost in the Pac-12 tournament against Oregon State, a team that went far in the dance. And Moose, in that game, they were up 17 in that game in the second half. So my point is, even though they got off to a really bad March, man, those are three games they easily could have won. And if they would have won those games, maybe we're looking at realistically, who knows, a 6, 7, or 8 seed. But 14 points? I get it. It's usually just bet Gonzaga, lay the points, and you are undefeated so far in the NCAA tournament. But I think Mick Cronin is going to slow this game down, dictate the pace in this game. Johnny Juzang has been awesome. Jaime Jaquez has made some amazing shots. He plays so physical. There's a toughness to UCLA that I've talked myself into taking 14, but when Gonzaga wins by 30, I'm going to be like, what was I thinking? But I'll take all the points in this spot.
Yeah, no, and I get it, but you look at this Bulldog team, and maybe I learned my lesson, Tim. I convinced myself to take USC plus the points against Gonzaga, and 2 minutes into the game, I had instant regret of taking USC when that game is 7-0, and Mobley's yelling at his head coach going into the timeout after they called timeout on the court. So I don't know if I agree with you about UCLA. Mick Cronin's a great coach. The Bruins, they're a fun team to watch. Love Tiger Campbell, their point guard as well. He's been great. So I just look at Gonzaga. They just look like an absolute freight train. Their offensive efficiency is right there with Villanova a couple years ago, and they're even better.
Yeah, I mean, Drew Timme, if you haven't seen him play, he's pretty easy to spot off. He has a very dirty mustache, and it's become like a handlebar sensation, and he plays old school. Gonzaga plays old school, and I've said this about basketball. I think the guys now are more talented, but the game is easier to play. Meaning if you play kind of the old school, throwback would be for you old timers out there, Bill Bradley, Walt Frazier, a little bit younger than that, maybe like the old Celtics teams, like they had such great basketball panache, great basketball IQ. And that's what Gonzaga plays like. Like guys are open, the ball moves, and there's just a simplicity to their offense. But Timmy's got outstanding footwork. If I was guarding Gonzaga, I would double team Timme the whole game and take the ball out of his hands. And then you just hope that shooters miss. Because that does happen. You're playing in a football stadium. You rarely play in a football stadium. Like there could be a game where Gonzaga goes 7 of 29 from 3. But guarding Timme one-on-one, Evan Mobley is going to be a top 3 pick in the NBA draft. And Moose, he scored whenever he wanted against them. So if Mobley can't guard him one-on-one, how do you expect anybody on UCLA? I would double Timmy and get the ball out of his hands, make someone else beat you.
All right, so that's one of the national semifinals we're going to see on Saturday. How about the second game, thought to be a closer matchup, Kelvin Sampson and the Houston Cougars taking on the Baylor Bears. Everyone's been looking at this Baylor-Gonzaga matchup, a matchup we should have seen in the regular season, did not due to COVID-19 positives on the Baylor and their break. But what about this matchup? Houston, a team that not a lot of people believed in, even then with them being a 2 seed, taking on the Baylor Bears.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Rutgers fan, you're scratching your head right now, being like, "This could be us," right? I mean, that was a game that
they had them. They make that. They make that dunk. They win.
I mean, that was a game. I actually had Houston in a parlay on the money line, laying like 330 in that game, and they're down 10 in the second half, and I'm like, they're dead. And they figured out a way to win. And honestly, if they would have made some free throws and some layups, they probably would have won a little bit easier than what they did. But I think that just shows you the type of job that Steve Pikiell's doing at Rutgers, and they should literally give him whatever he wants because he's made that team competitive in the Big Ten, and obviously they could have made a deep run. But I like Houston in this spot with the points. You know, you got a Baylor team that these kids know each other. You got local Texas kids. Houston can match the physicality of Baylor. And I think Villanova did an amazing job of chasing Baylor off the three-point line. Villanova held the Bears to 3 of 19 from 3. And Baylor right now is the best team shooting the 3 in college basketball. And Houston, Kelvin Sampson, his teams have always had identities, right? It's like physicality, defense. The only thing that makes me angry about Kelvin Sampson is my senior night at Northwestern. Right. We played Indiana. We lost at the buzzer. And after the game, Moose, Kelvin Sampson said, you know, Doyle's going to be a heck of a YMCA player one day. And I was so pissed after the game. I wanted to like ring him by his neck and be like, YMCA? Now that I look back on it, he was 100% right. I am an amazing YMCA player.
That is a great line. That is a great line. So you like Houston plus the points? Would you think Houston could win the game outright? I
think Houston could win the game outright. I'm not, you know, when you're picking games, and that's what I do for CBS Sports HQ. I mean, I'm a fortune teller. It's hard to pick winners. You know that. I know that. Anybody who gambles that knows that. So I do think that Houston has a shot to win this game, but I feel like this is going to be like a 59-57 type game, low possession game, and especially in a low-scoring, low possession game, you're going to give me 5 points? I think that's a major edge in this spot. Houston's tougher than Baylor, so I think that they can match up physically with Baylor. But, yeah, like you said, everybody wants to see Gonzaga. Everybody wants to see Baylor in the final.
Would you be stunned if Gonzaga's not winning the national championship Monday night?
I think Baylor could beat them 2 out of 10 times. So, you know, Baylor, the way they could shoot the 3, they go out there and shoot 12 of 18 from 3. Gonzaga feels tight. You know, we've seen this movie before, right? Kentucky with Devin Booker coming off the bench, they couldn't get it done. They were undefeated. They were in Indianapolis. We saw UNLV back in the day. Larry Johnson
losing to Duke.
They lost to Duke. That was in Indianapolis too. So they are bucking like major history, and all the pressure is on them. But in my eyes, they're the clear-cut favorite.
All right, we're chatting with Tim Doyle, CBS Sports, out in Indianapolis, covering the Final Four. He also does a ton of work for NBA TV. You were on the Nets call last night, Tim. Let's talk a little bit about the NBA because, you know, Aldridge, no Harden, out with that hamstring injury. No Kevin Durant, still nursing that hamstring injury. You get Aldridge now with the Brooklyn Nets. I guess my question is, the Aldridge fit, Game 1 looked great. I mean, LaMarcus looked fantastic last night. How does he help this team? And really, who is beating the Brooklyn Nets if Anthony Davis and LeBron James are not 100%? If they're 100% healthy, it's the Lakers, but they could beat them. I'm not saying they would, but outside of the Lakers, who the hell is beating the Nets?
In the East, no one's beating the Nets. I think out West, I do think there would be some great series. I mean, talk about a dream matchup, Nets-Lakers. I mean, our ratings bonanza that would be. But the Lakers are struggling right now. Last 4 games, they've had a tough time just scoring 100 points without LeBron and Anthony Davis. It's going to be interesting to see how far they fall in a series. I was talking to a bookie, and he said if they play Utah in a 1-8 matchup, even if the Lakers are fully healthy, they would be plus 180, the Lakers, in a 7-game series against Utah if they fell all the way to the 8th spot, which could happen, but it's unlikely. LaMarcus Aldridge was so solid last night. You know, I thought when they picked him up, he was going to play key roles at key points. Meaning he's not like, he's not the guy that he used to be, but he could become very important in a series against Embiid. His physicality, he could become important in series when you got to get some low post scoring or Durant is in foul trouble. But like, this has almost become for the Brooklyn Nets an embarrassment of riches. And the smartest thing Steve Nash ever did, was hire Mike D'Antoni. Because when Harden went to Brooklyn, I did not think it was going to work out. I was like, man, they only have one basketball there. Is Kyrie going to fit in? D'Antoni knew that bringing in Harden, it was going to work because obviously he had great success with him in Houston. And Durant and Kyrie are cool with Harden handling the basketball. He's averaging 11 assists this year. I think James Harden deserves to be the MVP. It's most valuable player. I know he was fat in Houston. I got to get on that plane, Moose, that he took from Houston to JFK because he lost like 30 pounds overnight. I've gotten fat during the pandemic too.
I could probably use 2 or 3 of those flights then, Tim, to drop 30 pounds each flight. Yeah, he's been great. I can't, Maggie and I have had the discussion numerous times about Harden, the MVP. I'm not taking away from his brilliance this year, and he's been great. And how he's adjusted his game and Mr. Triple-Double and, 17 assists, and he's been remarkable. I just can't in this year give him the MVP of the league after what transpired in Houston. I just can't. Not this year. He can win it next year. Maybe now the hamstring injury does hurt him. Don't want to see him
Who would you give it to this year then?
I would give it to Jokic right now.
Yeah, I have a hard time, and I'm just playing devil's advocate. I have a hard time giving it to a guy whose team is 5th in a conference. I know his stats
He's basically averaging a triple-double, though.
No, I know, but we've seen that, right, with Westbrook?
No, I know.
I find it, most valuable player, then LeBron should win the award every year. You know it, I know it, the American people know it. He's been the best player for 15 years in the NBA. But I think value, I'll give you a guy that I put a bet on, and if he wins, I win $100,000 because I got him at 5,000 to 1. I put 200 on him, is Chris Paul. Chris Paul, I got him at 5,001. And here was my rationale. I do think that Phoenix has to catch Utah, which is probably unlikely out west. But let's just say they catch Utah and they get the number 1 seed. Man, they added one guy and they went from being a non-playoff team, the Suns, to the best team in the Western Conference. To me, that shows Chris Paul's value. Right now, they have the 2nd best record in the West. I'm holding a Suns Pacific Division title at 20-1 that I feel really, really good about. But for me, it's not best player, it's most valuable. And I think Chris Paul, James Harden, Jokic just had a great year. Embiid was probably going to win the award, or LeBron before they got hurt. But I think the MVP conversation this year is intriguing as it's been ever before.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think there's a lot of people it's building up more and more momentum for James Harden, even though he missed the game last night because of just how well he has played, and he has made people forget how it ended down in Houston with the Rockets. So I agree with you. I think the MVP race in the NBA is a fascinating one, and I agree. I think Jokic does get knocked, even though his stats have been unbelievable because of where that team sits in the Western Conference. The other one would be, can Giannis win 3 straight MVPs with the Milwaukee Bucks?
I think that if the Bucks win the East, and that's why if you want to get in right now, you could still get Giannis at about 7-1. If you think the Bucks are going to win the East, you got a really strong leg to stand on. Like, I really feel this year more than ever, and that's why I don't like Jokic, and he's about pick him right now if you want to bet him. This year more than ever, winning is a priority. Like, if you could prove to me you got the best team in the West, the best team in the East, no one's going to win it on the Jazz because they are really a collective unit. But if you got to finish in the top 2 or 3, at least to be in the MVP conversation. But yeah, the Giannis thing, I think the one thing that hurts him is we've kind of seen this movie. And if the playoffs started today, the Bucks at the 3 would play the New York Knicks at a 6. And don't you think Tom Thibodeau would have an interesting game plan drawn up defensively to stop Giannis? And
I'm all in on Tibbs, Tim. I really am. He's done an unbelievable job this year. Randall readjusting his game. I know people love to get the minutes police out on Thibodeau, but the culture change, and hearing Rick Carlisle saying that nobody in the NBA is surprised that Tom Thibodeau is now winning with the Knicks. It starts there. You got to get the players buy-in. But Tibbs coming back to New York after being a longtime assistant here in New York just flat out works.
Here's the thing that frustrates me. And growing up on Long Island, obviously, I fell in love with all the New York teams. I got my Islander shirt on now.
I know. Look at you representing, playing to the Twitch audience this morning.
But like when I was growing up, the Amazings, they had an identity, right? There was a toughness to them when they were winning in the 80s. When the Knicks were winning in the 90s, even though they didn't win a title, man, you knew they were going to play defense. You knew they were going to be physical. Tom Thibodeau has brought an identity. And what frustrates me about the other teams in New York is I don't know what they do. Like, know what you do. Are you a running team? Are you a passing team? Like, are you going to score? Like, at least the Nets have an identity. They're going to try to outscore you. They're going to be fun to watch. But they've all bought into Tom Thibodeau. It doesn't work all the time. Hey, Mike D'Antoni, it didn't work with the Knicks because Carmelo Anthony didn't want to play that offense. It didn't work with the Lakers because Kobe Bryant, God rest his soul, he didn't want to go up and down. He wanted to play one-on-one. So, you got to have the right players who are willing to buy in. But I love the Knicks' identity. RJ Barrett's been a pleasant surprise. I really had my doubts about him, but he's really worked on his game. He's become more reliable of a shooter. And then Julius Randle, Mark, I think he's going to be a perennial all-star every year.
Agreed. Tim, right now, Nets going to win the NBA title?
I have Jazz tickets at 35-1, but yeah, the Nets deserve to be the favorite. But I'm rooting for Utah right now. You know what's amazing about the Jazz? They have an advantage. COVID doesn't exist, so they got fans out there going crazy for all their games. That's going to be a huge home court advantage for them out in Utah.
Well, Tim, it will be out in Utah with fans in attendance. Tim, try and stay warm out there in Indianapolis. How's your son Joe doing? Good?
Yeah, he's doing great. Thank you so much for asking. We just have one rule in our house. If he picks 3 straight losers against the spread, he's grounded. Just for like an hour, but that we hold him to a high. 3 straight ATS losses, you're grounded for an hour, no iPad. Go in your room.
Tim, we got to get together up in Saratoga this summer, all right, buddy?
For sure, Moose. Thanks for having me on, man.
You got it. Tim Doyle out there in Indianapolis covering the Final Four for CBS Sports. Check him out, NBA TV. Good man.